everybody. Welcome to Rachel's Reviews, and we have another episode of Theater Tuesdays. I'm very excited today because I have with me the founder and what would you say your official title? Editor?
My official title is president.
President of Utah Theater Blockers Association. Russell Warne is here with us today, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, so this is your first time on the show, so why don't you introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about how you developed your love of theater?
Yeah, I'm, like you said, president of Utah Theater Blockers Association. I've been with the group almost since the very beginning. In the coincidence of coincidences, it was founded by my former roommate, Dave Mortensen, who's a producer. This is in 2010. As traditional media was shrinking its coverage of the arts, he was finding it more difficult to get coverage of his shows. And so he said, fine, I'll start my own media outlet. And he brought me in at the very earliest stages because I'd already been reviewing plays on social media. Back when I was an undergraduate, this would have been 2006, Facebook launched a new feature called Notes. We don't see it around anymore. They haven't gotten rid of it completely, but it's very hidden. But they were basically long form blog posts, basically, that you could just post. And
yeah,
for a couple months, I was like, I want to use this feature, but what do I want to write about? What do I want to write about? And I'd seen a play, and I was minoring in theater studies at the time. I said, well, I'll review the last show I saw. And I did that for myself. And after about 3 or 4 of them, I started getting coworkers who aren't theater people at all saying, oh, it was really interesting. I read your review. And then people started telling me they were buying tickets based on my reviews. And so I thought, oh, I'm pretty good at this. And so I've been doing that for about 3 years before UTBA started. And been with the organization ever since. It's been around for 13 and a half years.
Wow.
And as media coverage of the arts has continued to shrink, it's now the largest and oldest theater reviewing site in the state. And last year, if you count reviews of streaming shows that weren't based in Utah, things like Broadway HD, we published 250 reviews last year.
That's a lot.
We have a big team that covers everything all over the state. Everyone will have us as their guests, and we're very proud of it.
Yeah, you should be. That's amazing. Do you remember what was that first play that you reviewed?
That I reviewed on my own. I believe it was A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Okay.
If I remember right, it was either that one was the first or something else, but it was a student production of Midsummer Night's Dream, and it had about a cast of 6 or 8.
Okay.
They double casted it, as a lot of the modern productions do, or you have, for example, the Duke of Athens, Theseus also playing Oberon, and you had, so they double casted that, and they also double casted the lovers as the mechanicals, and I liked how I remember how they did that. They would have a costume piece that would represent every character, and when actors would switch characters, because some of these characters are in the same scenes as each other, the mechanicals and the lovers, for example, are in most of Act 5 together as the play within the play is performed. As they would switch characters, they would throw off a costume piece and leave it on the stage where that character was standing as they went and played the other one. Yeah, it was really clever. And so yeah, that was one of the first. I liked it. And so yeah, I've probably written, I don't know exactly how many, but I've probably written definitely at least 300, but probably somewhere around 400 play reviews, maybe more, in the past 16 and a half years.
It seems like you're a big Shakespeare person. Is that accurate? Would you say you're?
Yes, I've called myself in a review a Shakespeare fanboy, and that long predates ever being a theater critic. I read Macbeth. I had seen a touring Shakespeare show that had come to my elementary school, Hamlet, when I was a kid. I liked it, and then I saw Midsummer Night's Dream as a teenager at the Shakespeare Festival. My parents took me the only time they ever took me as a kid. And then I read Macbeth as a teenager. But what really got me to realize it is when my English class, my sophomore year, read Midsummer Night's Dream, and these 400-year-old jokes were still getting laughs.
Yeah.
I thought, oh my gosh, this Shakespeare guy, he is a genius. And so that's what got me really interested in Shakespeare. And in Utah, we love our Shakespeare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, if you like most parts of the English speaking world, he's often performed. He's part of the canon. And so even when I don't love a play, I've probably seen it a lot.
Yeah.
Because I reviewed a lot of shows here. I can't tell you how many times I've seen As You Like It, even though I don't like it. It's not a very good play, but people keep putting it on, so I keep reviewing it.
That's so funny because I don't think I've actually, maybe I've seen it once, but yeah, they do love. I actually just saw Macbeth this last weekend, and that was incredible. It was such a good production.
I love Macbeth.
Yeah.
And, just there's certain plays, not just Shakespeare, but there's certain plays that just allow directors to just be so creative and innovative and wonderful. And Macbeth is one of them, because everything from the fights to the witches to the hallucinations and the sleepwalking and oh my gosh, the murders, like you have to be a pretty bad director to put on a boring Macbeth.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you say Midsummer's Night Dream was the one you saw in high school?
Yes. At the Shakespeare Festival.
So was that one of those like formative theater experiences growing up, or what were some other ones that you had that really solidified your love of theater?
Was seeing a traveling Hamlet when I was in like first grade. I was so fascinated by it, and they did it in Elizabethan dress. I want to say it was BYU's traveling company that they still have now, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But when you're 7 years old and there's people sword fighting and you're in your cafetorium, that's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember just being fascinated by the character Laertes, Polonius's son. And I even named a kitten Laertes when I was a kid. And I almost convinced my wife to use it as a middle name for one of our children, but I didn't win that. I didn't win that argument. But so I've always been fascinated by Hamlet and Laertes. Another formative experience was when I would have been 15. A local group was putting on The Music Man, and as is often the case, they needed more boys in the show, more teenage boys. And my parents drafted me in. I didn't want to do it. You have to do this. And I ended up really loving it. I made a lot of friends and, really fell in love with the show. It helps that Music Man is a very well crafted book musical.
Yeah.
It's been a favorite for over 60 years for a reason. But I made a lot of friends and I had a lot of fun. And after that, I was like, oh, I want to do another. And then, so I'd say those were some of my really formative experiences. Seeing Midsummer Night's Dream as a teenager, it was interesting. And I remember Puck being a fun character to watch, but I don't ever remember that one being like, wow, I want to see these sort of shows the rest of my life.
I think Dead Poet Society ruined Midsummer Night's Dream for me. Whenever I see it, I'm always like, oh, it's so sad. It's like it's not as sad.
Yeah, and Midsummer Night's Dream, it's worldwide, it's one of Shakespeare's most popular ones. It mounted a lot, and so I still see it and I like it, but there's this little bit of me that's like, do I have to watch do I have to watch Lysander and Demetrius fight again?
Yeah.
I will admit there's a little fatigue there setting in, but when a group did a theater for young audiences production of it nearby, I did take my kids to it to review it. So and that's one of the things that I'm enjoying now is taking friends and my children to shows and seeing them see a classic for
Yeah.
the first time, because none of
Well,
us were born having seen Hamlet. None of
right.
us were born having seen Into the Woods or Death of a Salesman. And so I love seeing people see
Yeah.
those for the
Yeah,
first
and you post
time.
sometimes on your Facebook your kids' reactions, which can be really cute. That's
Yeah,
funny.
my children, and right now they're 9 and 7. um they think it's normal for someone in the group to be taking notes when they go to a
Yeah.
play, because
Yeah.
as a critic I always take notes. Every professional critic takes notes when they watch a show, because you can't write a good review without it. And so after being my plus one for a couple of years, my kids just sort of expect, oh, there's always someone bringing a notebook. And then after they would take notes for about a year, starting last year, they started saying, okay, now it's time to write my review. They would wake up the next morning, Dad, I need your laptop. I need to write my review. So I let them, and for a 7-year-old, and they type them on their
Yeah.
own. I don't
Yeah.
type it for them. For a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, they're pretty astute. When my oldest, I took him to A Christmas Story when he was 5. He would have been 5.5. And he starts in the show kvetching about the set. I'm like, you gotta be quiet. For all you know, the designer's right by you. Shh. What kindergartner grumps about the set of a show? And he's
That's
like,
funny.
they have the couch there, but the backdrop makes it look like it's outdoors. I'm like, shh, be quiet. You're right, but be quiet. So yeah,
Right.
my kids, yeah, they take notes, they write their own reviews, and they kvetch about the set or costumes and stuff. It's
Mhm.
fun. It's
Yeah.
fun for them to be my plus one.
Are you a fan of Rachel's Reviews? Do you look forward to Family Movie Night, Female Film Critics panels, or the Talking Disney podcast? If so, please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a Patreon. As a patron, you get to access monthly events such as the watch-alongs and Q&As, where you get to talk to stars and find out the behind the scenes of the movie making industry. And you can pick what I review for Family Movie Night or even become a guest on the podcast. Podcasts and YouTube channels are expensive, and I really, really could use your help. I would so appreciate it. You also get to be a member of the Facebook group where we talk about all the films that we're seeing, and we have so much fun. Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies and select one of the Rachel's fan tiers. That's patreon.com/hallmarkies. You've had a bunch of different roles in productions. You've directed before, right?
I've not directed. I've music directed.
Oh, okay.
And that was the main thing I did before I started writing reviews. I took piano lessons for 11 years, and towards the end of that, I started playing for auditions and in a pit orchestra and for rehearsals for plays, which is a fun experience. I need to go back to that sometime, but haven't been able to. Also, either in high school or college or on my own, I've acted. I stage managed once. I didn't like it. Never want to do that again. What else have I done? Oh, I've been a lighting technician. I'm
I was
sure
thinking
there's
you had
other
said you
stuff
had
that's
done
not.
Oliver before.
Yeah, I music directed Oliver. That's
Oh,
a
okay.
play music directed. In fact, that's how I paid my tuition for 1 year of college. Is I went to a teaching theater in California, and I was paid to be a music director on a youth production of Oliver, and that's what paid my college tuition my junior year.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how I know. And when I've done a show, I know it sometimes into its bones.
Mm-hmm.
And Oliver is one of those shows. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see every problem with this show, and every strength too.
Do you think
So
that
yeah, I've
helps
done a
you as
variety of
do you think that helps you as a critic, having had experience actually working on shows?
Oh, definitely, because and when I say working on them, I've been paid sometimes, but I've never been, an equity member. I've never been, a union
Right.
member doing this at a regional or professional theater. But I've seen from the other side of the footlights, from behind the scenes, what a show looks like when the budget runs out. Um, I've seen what it looks like when the director doesn't know what they're doing. I've seen what it looks like when, the tech isn't there. And I've also seen what happens when directors overcome the limitations of their space or the training of their cast, etc. And so it's helped me a lot to be able to diagnose the source of the problems. The scene isn't working. Why? Is it the writing? Is it the directing? Is it the acting? That can sometimes be very hard.
Mm-hmm.
But because I've seen what a show looks like when one of those pieces isn't functioning well.
Yeah.
Then when I'm reviewing a show, I can say, aha, I know what's going on here. The director is also in the cast, and when they're on stage, the blocking falls apart. Aha, that's what's going on. This is a directing issue.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can say, all right, the writing's really clunky and the actors are doing their best with it. We need to blame the playwright for this scene. So it's helped me a lot to see how shows are put together and what it looks like when something goes wrong, because
Mm-hmm.
poor directing looks different from poor acting. And
Right.
poor acting looks different from poor writing. And, when do you cut the lighting designer some slack because the budget clearly didn't allow them to do a good job? Or when do you blame the designer for not being good at what they're supposed to do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, being able to, I wish I could do more, but
Yeah.
because of family commitments right now, I haven't been able to do a show in like 10 years, but that's fine.
Yeah. So what would be your advice to somebody who's interested in writing for UTBA, and what you look for in a potential critic?
That's a good question, because I'm the first person who screens people's applications. Number one thing you need to have, if you want to be a theater reviewer or a theater critic and to be any good at it, is you need to have a love for the art form. There are reviewers, thankfully none of them at UTBA, but there are reviewers, some of whom are professionals, who it's clear that they do not have a passion and a love for the art form. You need to be cheering internally. You need to be cheering on the show, even if you hate it completely. You need to come to the theater hoping that this one will succeed. And you need to love the art form enough to stick through it when the shows aren't very good. And to love it enough and have a passion enough for it so that when you write that negative review, it's coming from a place of wanting the art form to meet its full potential. So that's the number one thing you need. Number two, you got to write. And if you're thinking of jumping into the reviewing or the theater criticism game, you need to get some practice. And I got a head start. I was doing this on social media quietly to myself for 3 years without any intention of ever, making it the main thing I do in theater, but I was doing it for 3 years anyway. And that helps get cliches out of your system. That helps get you out of thinking that reviewing can only form one, have one structure to it. And it also gets you used to writing the negative reviews and writing a rave, because that first really negative review is hard to write.
Yeah, I was like out of the frying pan into the fire, because the first review that I did for UTBA was a really, really negative review. And I'm like, everybody's gonna think I'm a hater.
To send people to good shows for their first one, but sometimes
and I so rarely do a rant review. And I don't know if that was really a rant, but a really negative. Usually I'm pretty easy to please. But yeah, that was like the height of irony, I thought. The first one.
And we're lucky that in Utah, compared to other parts of the country where I've lived, and I've lived in North Dakota, I've lived in California, I've lived in Texas. the level of talent is
Yeah.
really high.
Unbelievable.
A $15 show in Utah is as good as a $30 show elsewhere.
Oh, at least.
Um,
Yeah.
and so we're lucky that most of the stuff is pretty good anyway. And so at UTBA, last time I did a tally, about 70% of our reviews were positive, about 20% were mixed, and then about 10% were negative. Um, sorry that one of those 10% were your first one.
Yeah. But you gotta be real. I mean, what are you gonna
Yeah,
do?
yeah,
Yeah.
and even though it hurts to write a negative review, it's sometimes, especially that first one, you got to do it if you're going to have any credibility. Because if you
Yeah.
write a positive review and then people say, wow, I should see the show, they buy a ticket and it's a train wreck, they're never going to listen to you again. And so it's a necessary evil. I never relish it.
Yeah.
I don't like writing negative reviews. That being said, I've gotten some good zingers into negative reviews. I might be proud of like that one line, but I'm not
Yeah.
proud that I just sit through a show. But coming back, you have to have that passion for the art form.
Yeah.
Um, because I've had times where I've turned to my +1 or I've texted to a friend at intermission. I need to get a new hobby. This show's really bad. I'm not allowed to leave early. I need a new hobby. And then I write the day of review. Then the next morning I wake up, it's like, what show am I going to review next? You have to love it to stick through it, through some pretty
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
shows. And then the last thing I would say that people need is you do need a knowledge of the art form. You do need to understand. A good example is the purpose of an Act One finale song in a musical. What's the purpose? The purpose is to get people to come back after intermission.
Yeah.
You need to understand why, for example, cross-dressing was so popular in Shakespeare's plays. Well, it was only men on stage at the time, and apprentices and less experienced actors played the female roles. And so what's easier than playing a woman if you're a man? Playing a woman disguised as a boy or a man.
Right.
It's like understanding, having knowledge, knowing what the difference between an artistic director and a director is. You do need to have some factual knowledge, also.
Mhm.
But for a lot of people, that comes with the passion anyway, as they
Yeah.
learn about something they're interested in. So those are the three things I think are most important.
Yeah. I
Um,
know that you put a ton of thought into the whole process of criticism and how what film, I mean, not what films, what theater is reviewed and how it's reviewed and the whole process. And how has that kind of evolved for you?
um, I believe that every production that wants a review should be able to get it. Now, what that review looks like is going to vary. At UTBA, we don't review, for example, K-12 shows, because their purpose is different from the purpose of shows presented to the general public. That being said, if a high school teacher wants someone to have, an outside pair of eyes to give feedback on their show, they should be able to get that if that's what they want.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that will look very different from a UTBA review. It might be more about whether this cast has formed a cohesive group. It might be more about whether the actors have grown over the course of the rehearsal process, because that's important in K-12 theater. And so I think that there should always be some sort of feedback mechanism for any production that wants it. If they don't want it, that's a different ball of wax. How have I evolved? I compared to when my compared to when UTBA first started, I'd already had 3.5 years of experience writing reviews, 3 years of experience writing reviews. My process hasn't changed much since then. But in that first couple years, learning how to efficiently take notes in the dark, learning how to finesse writing a negative review without making it sound like the people on stage are no talent hacks, which they might be, but you shouldn't have name calling in a review, in my opinion.
Welcome to the Pilot Podcast. My name is BJ.
And my name is Me Too, and we promise this promo is worth it, so please don't skip ahead.
We're two judgy friends who put our judgmental skills to work for you. We review the pilot episodes of new and popular shows and shows that our listeners request to answer your question, should I watch this?
Look, a lot of us are spending a lot more time at home, and yes, we should be reading and trying new projects and enriching ourselves, but does anything beat binging a great show?
Let us take the guesswork out of deciding what your next show will be. Tune in to The Pilot Podcast at thepilotpodcast.com.
And so, my overall general philosophy about the value of reviewing, the value of public criticism hasn't changed much, but a lot of the nuts and bolts have. I'm less wordy than I used to be. I feel like, I don't need to talk about more than 4, 5, 6 actors by name. That's something that's changed. I used to talk about a lot more actors by name. I'm more willing to criticize the choice to produce a show than I was before. So a lot of my details and nuts and bolts have changed, but the overall philosophy hasn't changed much. I still, just as I did, over 10 years ago, think that reviewing is a valuable process for giving feedback to artists, for letting audiences know what's in their area, and sometimes for calling out for change, and complimenting change when you see it, complimenting companies on improving the diversity of their casting, complimenting companies on taking risks, being able to, that's a valuable thing. So, those purposes haven't changed a lot, but a lot of my nuts and bolts have. But that's just part of gaining experience and growing.
It's been interesting for me transitioning from a movie critic, or flip-flopping back from being a movie critic to being a theater critic. To me, I've seen quite a bit of difference. What do you think is unique, particularly about theater criticism, that you, at least in what you've read of other forms of criticism?
Where theater criticism's most unusual compared to other forms of arts criticism is the emphasis on the multitude of people who contribute to a show.
Yeah.
Film criticism is almost exclusively about the director and the actors. Maybe you get a little bit of comment about cinematography in film criticism. With theater criticism, man, they're talking, with good theater criticism, I should say, they're talking about the lighting designer and the playwright and the actors and the directors. And I've had people at UTBA even comment about stage managing and dramaturgy. And other art forms are also collaborative. Especially film. Look at how many hundreds of people's names are on the credits of a modern Hollywood film. But with theater criticism, it's much more about commenting on the collaborative nature of the art.
Yeah.
But I love reading criticism from other art forms. Dance criticism blows my mind. I would be a horrible dance critic, and not just because I'm not a professionally trained dancer, but dance criticism, it blows my mind how some people can write 750 words about what, to me, when I review a musical, is one component of the night. And so for them, it's like really zooming in with a magnifying glass on movement and aesthetics and other stuff that I've never spent more than like 2 paragraphs on.
Yeah.
You're right, there are huge differences between film and theater criticism. With film criticism, almost always, if you read a review, you can then go and find a copy of the movie and watch it. There's some exceptions, like, old lost silent films or films that might be obscure or not widely released, but 99% of the time, if you read a film critic's piece, you can then read the movie and rent the movie and get the exact same experience. That's not true of theater criticism. At UTBA and at the New York Times, everywhere, the majority of people who read a review will never see that production. And so compared to film critics, I encourage our reviewers to write more detail about what they saw. Don't just say, oh, lovely period costumes. Say, low-cut dresses with corsets that lifted that lifted and pressed in. It's and you need much more exact terminology. I grew up in a family of all boys, and so I'm really bad at like terminology for women's clothes and dresses. So I'll have to like Google dress cut styles and find out, oh, that one's called an asymmetrical cut, and that one's called an A skirt,
Well, part of the reason, at least for me, that it was a challenge is because film criticism today has gotten so spoiler terrified that like sometimes even people will claim mentioning who's in the cast. I mean, in some cases it's obvious, like for No Way Home or something like that, then that is a spoiler. But for the most part, like basic details shouldn't be considered a spoiler. And you have to be, it forces you as a critic, as a film critic, to be really vague about, well, I really enjoyed the overall performances. You can't say I enjoyed in this scene when he responded to this. You can't say that because people, oh, you're spoiling it. You're spoiling. And whereas like I found at least that in theater criticism that they wanted me to be that specific, to say in this song, I was moved by this performance and the way that they walked across the stage or whatever it might be. And so that's definitely something that I had to work on, is that, I mean, yes, technically you could spoil things for theater, like, but I don't know, just found that they were a lot less sensitive and wanted more details, like you're saying.
Oh yeah, and a lot of it's because, and there are some times where theater company will say, I didn't review it, but I saw a production of Frankenstein here in Utah several years ago, and they said to people, we don't want the visuals spoiled. We don't want the final visual image. You will know it when you see it. Please don't talk about that. But that's rare. If you're reviewing Romeo and Juliet, you can talk about their final death scene. That spoiler was let out hundreds of years ago. And it is freeing and liberating. On the other hand, it can send you into a lot of existential angst when you see a really beautiful moving show or a really beautiful moving performance, and you realize what made this so profound or so sublime is going to disappear forever after the show closes. My words aren't going to capture this perfectly. And that can be very frustrating. But yeah, we are more detail oriented. And so, yeah, if you like the lighting, say that it was in the dream sequence when the lighting switched to blues and purples. And yeah, you got to say that because the majority of your readers will never, ever get to be able to see that firsthand.
So how do you approach when you're reviewing a small art council production, like you said, something with a very small budget, versus something that's equity or equity-like? How do you change your sort of perspective in your writing?
That's a really good question because companies vary in their missions, in their budgets, in their access to resources, and the training of their members, and they can sometimes vary massively in those terms, and you have to evaluate them fairly. It's not fair to evaluate an amateur arts council production on the same standards that you would at an equity theater, and vice versa. It's not fair to evaluate a college production the same way you would evaluate a high budget semi-professional place. And so I think that being familiar with the company, being familiar with the mission, and the company's characteristics are important. And if you've lived somewhere for a while, I've been living in Utah for most of my life, not always, that can help. Pioneer Theater has been the flagship Salt Lake City theater company since before I was born. And so I know, okay, if I walk into Pioneer Theater, I'm going to hold them up really high. But there are other clues, even if you're not terribly familiar with the company. Ticket price is one of them. And I ask myself, okay, what is fair to hold a show? What standards are fair to hold a show at when the ticket price is $10 compared to at the top non-equity theater companies in the state, which charge $50 or $60 for a ticket? So I look at ticket price. I try to find out about the mission of the company. Is it an arts council that casts everybody who auditions because their goal is to help as many citizens as possible participate in the arts? Or is it more of an exclusive group that is more about producing high-level professional polished shows, and they benefit the community by subsidizing those and making the ticket prices affordable? So I approach it based on ticket price, what I know about the company, the mission, and then I say, okay, what's a fair standard to hold them to? What are they doing right? What aren't they doing right? And there are some companies in Utah that very much regularly impress despite their limitations. And there's others that don't.
I don't think I've seen a bad show at Hope Box. I've been very impressed with the quality of the productions there. It's just an example.
Sometimes you can see limitations on the stage. When the costuming's based on what's in the actor's closet. When the stage is small. Often if the company owns their space or not. And those are other important tips. But yeah, we have some very impressive small companies here that, as long as you keep in mind, okay, this isn't Pioneer Theater, this isn't an equity house, you can still have a very enjoyable time without excusing shortcomings. There's a difference between being aware of shortcomings and allowing them to be excuses.
Well, and I was talking to a friend about this. Sometimes the small, flawed shows, I think get a little bit more invested in. Like, I feel like I'm almost part of the journey of and by the end, you're like, yes, they did it. They did such a good job. Like,
oh yeah, and like I said, when you're rooting for the art form, I reviewed twice in Eagle Mountain, which is this for those of you who are watching or listening and don't know, it's this outpost on the western edge of Utah County. You have to drive past so much to even get there. It is like the last outpost of civilization before the West Desert.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Merch Store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies Merch Store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/Hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/Hallmarkies.
Comedy of errors there. I could see the shortcomings, but I was rooting for them the whole time. And you know what? My son I took with me was laughing at the show, and he enjoyed it, and yeah, it was not as good as Pioneer Theater by an objective scale, but based on their limited resources, the fact that it's amazing there's any theater out there at all. It was great.
Yeah.
Their Cinderella wasn't as good, but Comedy of Errors was great.
Yeah.
And I love seeing companies succeed, and I consider like going on vacation, going to Broadway or going to an equity house. It's like going to Disneyland. Everything's polished. They have a lot of money. Everything's perfect. And if there's the slightest flaw, they want to fix it and make sure that nothing like that ever happens again. And that's fine. That's a fun vacation. I've taken my kids to Disneyland. Going to the little black box theater in a converted strip mall near your home is like going camping.
Right.
Sometimes there's flies or mosquitoes. Sometimes, it's not always comfortable.
A million degrees.
Yeah. But you know what? It can still be fun.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things are what make it fun. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of all levels of theater for different reasons. I think they all have their different charms.
So some have claimed that modern Broadway is have you actually used that amusement park? It's like amusement park attractions as opposed to theater. And with the Disney shows, the corporate shows, now we're getting like Back to the Future musical, which is actually supposed to be pretty good. Different things. How do you feel about that?
People have been saying that Broadway's past its prime, past its peak. People have been saying that for 70 years. There were people writing in there were critics and people writing in the Rodgers and Hammerstein era, which we now see as a golden age, that 50s, 60s, from Oklahoma to Fiddler, that era. There were critics back then saying that Broadway just isn't what it used to be. It will never go back to the golden age of Ziegfeld's Follies and Cole Porter. And so I'm a little cynical when people say, the latest turn on Broadway is negative. That being said, the economics are working against risk-taking. It used to be, and a good example is Phantom of the Opera. At the time, it was one of the most expensive shows ever mounted.
Yeah.
I believe its Broadway budget was something like $1.5 million. It used to be $1.5 million, and in purchasing power, that'd be probably something like $6 million today. Was absolutely an obscene amount of money to put on the stage. Now we have Broadway musicals capitalized at $20 million. And when there's that much money at stake, and you can only recoup your investment $10,000 at a time if your show's selling out every night, when you can only recoup your investment in $10,000 pieces, and for most shows less, you want to take as few risks as possible. And so it started with the producers, the modern age of the movie adaptation into a stage musical. It makes sense from a financial and marketing perspective.
Yeah.
And we can see this with what's on Broadway right now. You have Shucked, an original story written for the stage, competing with Some Like It Hot, a movie that came out over 60 years ago. Which one of them have more people heard of? Obviously, it's going to be Some Like It Hot. And so already from a marketing perspective, if you're trying to sell a ticket to Some Like It Hot, you can already say, well, it's a comedy. You're going to have a great time. Remember how fun Tony Curtis was?
Yeah.
You can't say that with Shucked or any other new things. So if you're an investor and a producer who wants to minimize your risk, you do start with a well-known title. No wonder Back to the Future. Everyone under the age of 45 is going to say, I know that movie. I loved it. I'm going to give the stage musical a shot. And so I think as Broadway shows get more and more and more expensive, producers are going to look for more and more and more and more places to reduce risk. And one of those is name recognition. It's also the same reason why most successful musicals open up today with stars in the roles, especially straight plays. And so I don't see that changing anytime in the future. There's never been a period in its history where Broadway shows have become less expensive to mount compared to the previous decade. And it's been true now for decades that the most innovative theater isn't on Broadway. It's off Broadway. It's in the regional houses. It's in the semi-professional companies. It's in experimental groups. It's on college campuses.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it's fun to go to Disneyland. It's fun to go to Broadway. And even when a show's not very good, it's fun to see the stagecraft. It's fun to see actors who are at the top of their field.
Yeah. That's what I say. I think I'm probably a little bit better a film critic than I am a theater critic, although I try to be good at both. But I just enjoy the experience of going to the theater so much that it's hard for me to have a bad time. It has to be pretty bad.
No, I agree. And as film becomes more and more about the streaming experience, theater, and to be fair, movie theaters have done better at selling the experience of going to a theater. But theater is always going to have the advantage over film of that communal experience. What's it like to share this immediate in-person experience with an actor and with 400 other people?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something still very special about that in the Zoom era, as you and I talk over a video call. So
I always ask, what for you do you think is an underrated show that you wish got more love, and a show that people love that you're like, not that great, overrated?
Let's start with what I think is overrated. Grease.
Okay. Yeah.
And when you ask people why they like Grease, here's what they say. Oh, I love Grease Lightning and Summer Lovin'.
It's got some bops, I think.
Okay, yeah. Like, here's 3 or 4 songs I like. And it's like, you can get those 3 or 4 songs by like buying the album. You don't need to see the show. And I'm not the most politically correct person, but what a horrible anti-feminist message. And it like romanticizes everything that's wrong with high school, the cliques and the exclusiveness and the bullying. And every time I see Grease, I'm like, who likes this show? And people keep producing it. Like, I just, every time I see someone's mounting Grease, I think an angel dies or something. It's horrible. But it has like 4 good songs, and so people forgive it. And so I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's got that it is one of those ones that definitely has the nostalgia factor for sure. But if I had to pick, I would definitely. Why
it was such a hit when it first came out in the 70s, and then when the movie was such a hit. I think people who grew up with the movie loved it. I think the movie helped it. And
the movie is like one of the most successful movies like ever.
Yeah, to be fair, Hollywood usually screws up turning stage musicals into movies. I will admit, Grease is one of the really good,
pretty good,
film adaptations of a
like I would always pick Bye Bye Birdie over Grease. I think they're similar. I would have picked Bye Bye Birdie, but and maybe that's part because I was in Bye Bye Birdie in high school. But I hate the mother in Bye Bye Birdie. Is just so cringe.
Bye Bye Birdie, its book is not aging well, and not just because of the mother, but also the then current cultural references Just
Yeah.
no one gets him anymore.
Right, like Ed Sullivan
Like
and stuff.
I have to like look him up. I'm like, what's Postum?
Yeah.
Although I will say I watched Bye Bye Birdie 2 years ago in a local production at an arts council, and I watched it with my kids.
Mhm.
It was the first time I hadn't seen Bye Bye Birdie probably about 8 or 9 years, but it was the first time I watched it with my kids. And it was the first show I'd ever seen where my experience watching it had changed because my life role had changed. Suddenly I was thinking, the dad the dad in this family has a really good point about a lot of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is a great show for community or high school because it has
Agreed.
so many solos. It has so many group scenes. And I think at least for high school, anybody who wants to participate should be allowed to participate because how do you know if you like something if you never get a chance to try it?
Yeah.
And so that's what's great about Bye Bye Birdie is that like there's just all these scenes where you could have as many people as wanted to participate could be a part of it.
You need a whole
And-
town to pull off Bye Bye Birdie.
Yeah.
Come on, why not?
But like pretty much the mother, her whole joke is I'm racist.
Yeah, and
I'm just like
that wears thin.
it wears really thin.
Yeah,
But
but
I do
that's a
prefer it to
show
Grease.
that Grease is so overrated. Underrated. My very favorite musical is Merrily We Roll Along. It's a Sondheim show.
I've never seen it.
I think it's a masterpiece. I think it is just as good as Sweeney Todd, which is what most people see as the masterpiece. If you don't know the story, it's about three friends, but the story moves backwards. So you have this opening scene at a party, and you have no idea who all these people are and what they're talking about and who they're talking about and why they're arguing. And then the next scene happens a few years earlier, and the next one happens a few years before that, and it goes back in time, something like 17 years in total. And the final scene you see is when the three friends first meet. And then it's like, and gradually it all comes together. So it's as confusing as all get out in your first like two scenes. Hang in there. But its score is brilliant. It originally came out in 1981. By that point, Sondheim hadn't written a traditional score in over a decade. But he decided, I'm going to go back and write this as 16-bar songs. But because he was so brilliant, it doesn't sound anything like that golden age Rodgers and Hammerstein era. It sounds like, and remember his mentor was Oscar Hammerstein. It sounds like a Rodgers and Hammerstein show had sex with a 1970s Sondheim show, and out came this beautiful hybrid baby that's better than either one. And that's what it is. But the thing is that it got an 81 a disastrous premiere, and it had problems with the script at the time, and on top of that they had all young actors except for one person. The entire cast was between 15 and 24, and it closed in just 2 weeks, and it came down as one of these Sondheim bombs. But he worked on it for 13 years off and on as regional theaters mounted it before the show was frozen, and now it's a masterpiece. And it's finally getting its due. Over the past about 20 years, gradually it's gotten more favor with audiences, and it's had its third off-Broadway production in recently, and then that one's transferring to Broadway in September, starring Daniel Radcliffe as one of the three main characters, and it's just so underrated. And like I love everything about it. I love its score. I love the characters. I love how it's just like the story moves in reverse. Its story is in reverse. It starts off as a flop, and now it's recognized as like one of the jewels in the musical theater canon. But it's not produced as often as it should be. It's really underrated. And I'm also really tired of critics reviewing it and saying that asking whether this production will fix the show's flaws. Oh, please. Sondheim finished fixing its flaws in the 90s, okay? Like, we can stop.
I really want to see that.
Show.
I definitely, am gonna try to do a New York trip in the fall, and hopefully I'll get a
I'm
see that.
hoping, I'm
Oh, that
hoping
would
to.
be
I wasn't able to financially, wasn't able to swing the last two off-Broadway productions. But I read once a professional theater critic. I don't remember, I think it might have been Peter Marks from the Washington Post, but don't quote me on that, who said, I would be happy to review a company that does nothing but produce Merrily We Roll Along because it's so creative and so well done. I'm like, I can get behind that company.
yeah. I saw Assassins last year, and so I checked that off my list. Now I got to check Merrily We Roll Along. So obscure, rarely performed Sondheim.
Yeah. As far as straight plays go, overrated, I would say The Crucible.
Mm.
And it's become popular for two reasons. Number one is there's a lot of female roles, and so it entered the high school repertoire. But then also it's really distorted our view of post-war America. Because Arthur Miller trying to, write a metaphor of the Red Scare, the metaphor has overtaken reality. And now people say, oh, look, America went crazy with its anti-communist paranoia. And there were some places where it went too far, but Arthur Miller's analogy of, oh, the witch hunts with McCarthy are no different from the witch hunts in Salem only works if you either think that communists are fictional, the way witches are, or if you think the witches in Salem are real. There really were communists in the State Department. There really were people passing secrets to the Soviets and to the East Germans. And so to say, oh, it was nothing but a witch hunt, it has really distorted our view.
Too simplistic, you think?
Yeah, and it's so wordy, and it's 3 hours long, and like, unless it's the most amazing professional production ever, you start feeling that time slip away from your life.
Yeah. I've seen the movie. I've never seen the stage, but yeah, that's
Are you
long.
talking about? I think it was a TV movie, or maybe it was
What isn't Daniel Day-Lewis in it?
I think so,
Or
from the
Winona
early
Ryder?
90s. That's really good, and it cuts a lot on the stage.
Yeah.
But it was written in an era when people, if they bought a ticket to the theater, they expected it to be their whole night, and if the show was less than 2 hours, they would be rioting. They expected shows to be 3 hours. So that's some of it, but
Yeah.
Oh, it's just so wordy. Crucible doesn't end, and it's a flawed analogy. I
Yeah.
also hate the importance of being earnest, but
Oh.
that's another story.
Well, we like to end our interview with some fun get to know you questions. So first question, what is the best ice cream flavor?
Chocolate chip cookie dough.
Okay.
I love getting a little surprise in a bite, and having my ice cream changed up.
Yeah. All right. What's your favorite color?
Blue.
Good. Aside from show tunes, what music are you into?
I have really eclectic tastes, but I think because of my music training, I think I'm more into classical than most people are. I like a good Bach. And I'll often listen to that as I'm working. But I like, a good Bach or a good Handel concerto. That's probably why I'm more into than anything else. But like anyone, I like stuff that was popular when I was a teenager in the 90s, and there's nostalgia behind some of the music of my parents' generation because I heard it growing up. So
yeah. So what is your go-to date night food?
Go-to date night food. I don't know. My wife hadn't had dinner with one of our dates in a long time because it's like, usually like we can only get a sitter just for the show we're going to, not dinner also. Go-to date night food. You can never go wrong with pasta or going to a steak joint. So Italian, probably, I'd say.
Which do you like better, dogs or cats?
I like dogs more. And it's best friend.
Yeah. We always say cats, you have to earn their love.
Yeah.
Dogs not. Which do you like better, beaches or mountains?
Mountains.
Yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
I grew up in the Mountain West.
Yeah.
Gotta love the mountains. I feel like all naked and exposed when I don't have mountains nearby.
What is your favorite holiday to celebrate?
Thanksgiving, because my birthday can fall on it.
Oh, nice.
So it's my like private little holiday.
Nice. Okay. What is your favorite musical movie?
My favorite musical movie. Um, it depends. Um, I think that the original Music Man, not the one that was made for TV in I
Yeah.
think 2003.
Shirley Jones.
Yeah, the Shirley Jones one. That one really, probably more than any other broad Hollywood adaptation of a Broadway musical, really shows you how it really gives you a strong idea of how the show was staged
Mm-hmm.
in its original
Yeah.
production. So I like watching that for that purpose. I love the Hollywood version of Hairspray. It's just so much joy and fun, and it's so well filmed, and the choreography is just breathtaking. So I mean, I like different ones for different reasons. Little Shop of Horrors is another one that that works really, really well, and it does a really good job preserving the 50s charm, but then it has its own 80s charm too.
Yeah.
Which of course, they didn't intend. Oh, we want everyone to always love the 80s when they watch this movie, but it happened anyway. So yeah, those I think are some of my go-tos. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of them. King and I is another one.
Okay.
Which even though some of its casting practices wouldn't fly today, we would never have Cheetah Rivera today playing a Thai or an Asian character. Sorry, not Cheetah Rivera, Rita Moreno. I just love how sumptuous it looks, and how you'll never get another Yul Brynner ever.
Yeah.
So it's like I like a lot of
and such charming songs.
Yes,
Getting to know you.
King and I is falling out of favor because unless you live in an area with a lot of Asian actors you can cast, people tend to not to like it to mount it anymore.
Well, and the story is very bizarre. Like, I fell in love with a dictator. Like, yeah.
Well, and it's also, in an anti-colonial era, post-colonial era. Yeah. The idea of, well, we're going to bring in an outside European woman to civilize our own people. A lot of people don't stomach that well, but it's a gorgeous movie to watch. And even when I see it on stage, that first time that, right in Shall We Dance, when Anna and the King grasp hands for the first time, it's the first time they ever touch in the whole play or the whole musical. It's just electric. And it's one of the best moments that Rodgers and Hammerstein ever created. So I like watching that one.
That's a fun one. I saw it on Broadway years ago when I was in high school. I saw a production of King and I.
Is that the one that had Donna Murphy, the 90s revival?
Yeah. That was really good. Well, thanks so much for coming on and talking with us. This was so much fun. And thank you so much for all you do for UTBA and helping support the arts here in Utah, and giving me this sort of push to become a theater critic and write about theater. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. You have a great day.
We'd like to thank Raz for coming on the podcast. This was so much fun for me to get to talk with him and hear his perspective. And he had a lot of really interesting things to say. Let me know what you think in the comments section or on Twitter. And check out Utah Theater Bloggers for some really great writing on theater. And you can see a bunch of my reviews on there. And then also Rachel's Reviews Theater.com. And thanks again to Russ. And check out the Patreon and merch store. And we'll talk to y'all later. Bye.